Zelda Fitzgerald was one of the most scandalous and brilliant women of the 20th century. She tore through Montgomery society like a spark through dry grass, refusing rules, refusing permission. Pilots circled her house to win her smile. One lost control and crashed in flames. When she met the young soldier, Scott Fitzgerald, the blaze spread. They burned through New York, drinking in hotel pools, barking at Hollywood parties, stripping bare at the Follies. They were the new gods of a restless age, their laughter drowning out the sound of collapse. She became its symbol, the flapper, the rebel, the untamed girl who made ruin look radiant. But behind the glitter, he was stealing her. Whole pages ripped from her diary, sentences lifted from her letters, her voice becoming his, her pain, his plot. Their marriage turned violent. He drank, she folded inward. When she loved another man, Scott challenged him to a duel, then locked Zelda away so she could never see him again. She tried to die. They gave her morphine and mockery. When she found salvation in dance, he called her grotesque, too old, too wild. As he sank into the bottle, he had her committed. She screamed to be released. When she wrote of her suffering, he stole that too, forced her not to publish, then rewrote her life in his own novel. From the heat of Montgomery to the mirrored salons of Paris, from a marriage that bled to the silence of her unraveling mind, Zelda Fitzgerald was not a muse. She was the author of The Fire, a woman who paid for every page in blood. This week, we tell her story. If you love stories like this, consider joining the channel. As a small, independent creator, your support truly matters. Every like, comment, and subscription helps these women's voices reach further and louder. Because here we tell the real stories, the forgotten, the fearless, the women who shaped history, shattered expectations, and set the world on fire. We have over 90 women's biographies, with more arriving every week. Now, let's dive into the scandalous and tragic life of Zelda Fitzgerald, the woman the world tried to silence. Zelda Sayre was born into a world still scented with magnolia and memory, where honor lingered longer than fortune, and ghosts of the Confederacy haunted drawing rooms and dining tables. Her lineage was steeped in pride and thwarted dreams, in governors and generals, elocution lessons, and front porch gossip. Her grandfather, Willis B. Mockin, carved his legacy from Kentucky soil and Confederate loyalties. He survived failed ventures, 3 marriages, and presided over Mineral Mount, raising daughters on discipline and tobacco. From that world came Minnie Mockin, Zelda's mother. Minnie was the wild lily of the Cumberland, bold, dangerously intelligent. She won a part in a traveling theater company until her father summoned her home with a warning: better dead than on stage. Eventually, she married Anthony Dickinson Sayre, a quiet Montgomery judge whose rituals became the rhythm of Zelda's childhood. The rustle of legal papers, the clink of the streetcar, silence at supper. Minnie poured her clipped dreams into music, children, and verses for a Kentucky paper. They raised 6 children in rented houses and quiet hope. A son died of spinal meningitis. Minnie shattered. A doctor said, "You have a daughter who needs you." And so she rose. From that sorrow, a pattern formed. Collapse and resurrection, beauty pressed into duty, longing denied but not extinguished. Zelda would inherit it all. She arrived July 24, 1900, the 6th child, born to a mother of nearly 40 and a father drawn into silence by rank. Her name came from fiction, a gypsy queen in a dime novel. Already, the story felt foretold. Zelda was golden where the others were dark. She was Minnie's chosen one, adored, indulged, nursed until nearly 4. Her wildness was called charm. Her faults were forgiven before they were named. She was never still. She swung from magnolias, roller skated before she could stand, plunged into creeks and stories. She moved through Montgomery like a breeze that refused to be tamed, scaling rooftops, climbing trees as if wings might sprout. She once stole a pot of pink geraniums and brought it to a party. Another time, she called the fire department, climbed onto the roof, and waited. Sirens came. Minnie gave Zelda nothing but permission. The rest, duty, restraint, responsibility, was left to the judge. But Zelda was less raised than released. The judge was upright and distant. Zelda loved him from afar, the man with penny candy in his pockets, molding clay animals on mountain walks. His name protected her from censure. Her mischief was whispered but rarely punished. The Sayre name was a shield and a trap. Zelda would later call it a crippling insulation, a privilege that freed her from consequence, but never shaped her. Summers drifted by like watercolor. Saluda, Mountain Creek. Zelda wandered hilltop verandas with no company but her thoughts. Later, she would try to recover that spell, in Switzerland, in fiction, in sanatoriums. But paradise once lost does not return. In 1909, she began ballet. It seemed an afterthought, but the movements carved into her: rhythm, rebellion, poise. By 1914, she entered Sydney Lanier High. She was clever, gifted in English and math, but wore brilliance like a shrug. "My studies had no value for me," she said. She held court at the ice cream parlor, sipping banana splits or dopes, Coca-Cola spiked with ammonia. When asked to write a poem, she dashed off, "I do love my Charlie so. It nearly drives me wild. I'm so glad that he's my beau, and I'm his baby child." The teacher frowned. The class howled. Zelda beamed. She read fairy tales, Plutarch, Wilde, Galsworthy. No structure, just hunger. Her clothes misbuttoned, her skirts rumpled. While others looked tidy, Zelda looked lit from within. By 15, she was unforgettable. Not because she followed the rules, but because she danced on their edges. It began with a ballet recital. Zelda stepped onto the stage in pink organdy, fresh flowers at her waist, hair in ringlets like a porcelain doll. She moved like something unknowable. The room shifted. The audience fell silent. When she danced, she ceased to be a girl. She became a belle. By summer, her profile appeared in the Advertiser. "Keep an eye out," they warned. "Just past 16, straightest nose, bluest eyes." She might have danced like Pavlova, if her feet weren't so busy chasing mischief. She danced cheek to cheek, vanished into parked cars, returned with flushed cheeks and rumpled skirts. She smoked, boodled, drank bootleg corn liquor. One night, she handed a suitor her petticoat mid-dance. "Too hot," she said. "Hold it." Another time, she waded into a stream, fully dressed. "She lived on the cream at the top of the bottle," a friend said. She wore a nude-toned silk swimsuit. Rumors claimed she swam naked. They called her wild, reckless, too free with her body, but Zelda already knew what they whispered. She could feel it in the way they looked at her. In Save Me the Waltz, she wrote of Alabama Beggs, "She's the wildest of the Beggs, but a thoroughbred, and I give a damn good show." When her father forbade her to go out, she climbed out the window. She wasn't fearless, but she pretended well enough that no one could tell the difference. Her siblings were quieter. Zelda felt no bond. "I had no memories of youth shared with them," she said. Her grandmother, whom Zelda adored, unalived herself. Her cousin vanished, but no one in the Sayre world said so aloud. Grief was swallowed whole. Then the war came and cracked it open. Montgomery filled with motion and uniforms. Camps Sheridan and Taylor brought soldiers from Yale, Princeton, and places she'd never dreamed of. The sidewalks changed. So did the air. Her senior year began with a satin sash and a parade of admirers. The boys were headed to war, to trenches, to glory. It thrilled her. She wrote over the top with Pershing. It won a prize. She scrawled across the newspaper clipping, "Not only is necessity the mother of invention, but a mother of invention is a necessity." She led the Grand March at the Alpha Tau Omega Ball in a dress called Exquisite. During intermission, she saw a suitor's photo in a shop window. When teased that he was behind glass, she kicked it in, took the picture, and walked on. By spring, her grades slipped. Her conduct fell. "There were a lot of soldiers in town," she said later. "I passed my time going to dances, always in love with somebody, dancing all night, and carrying on my schoolwork just with the idea of finishing." On April Fool's Day, she orchestrated a mass hooky, a movie, a picnic, a scandal. The next day, the senior class was suspended. Zelda returned triumphant. In the yearbook, she was voted prettiest and most attractive. Her mouth was used in the sketch of the ideal girl. Beneath her image, a borrowed verse. "Why should all life be work when we all can borrow? Let's only think of today and not worry about tomorrow." On a breathless southern night, Zelda arrived at the country club to perform the Dance of the Hours. She hadn't planned to go, but someone asked, and Zelda, never one to miss a stage, relented. At the edge of the room, a stranger in uniform watched her like a story he meant to steal. First Lieutenant F. Scott Fitzgerald, 21, newly stationed at Camp Sheridan. Too young for you, someone warned him. He ignored them. They danced. His hand too stiff, his eyes too sure of their hunger. Zelda noticed, but when she moved, he followed. When she spun, he softened. He studied her like punctuation, not a girl to admire, but a line to understand. There was no hesitation in him, and no shame. Later, she would write, "There seemed to be some heavenly support beneath his shoulder blades that lifted his feet from the ground." They matched, not just in youth and beauty, but in ambition, in longing, in their talent for performance. Zelda was unlike any girl Scott had ever known. Beautiful, yes, but not polished. Reckless. Her power didn't come from money or manners, but from knowing she could stop a room with a smile. To Zelda, he was no less mythic, a man in uniform with green eyes and the accent of elsewhere. He came from the land of novels and ambition, and he saw something no one else had. Not just a flirt, not just a belle, but a kindred spirit. He sent her a chapter from The Romantic Egotist, his unpublished novel, with a note both absurd and adoring. Zelda had never been written into a story before. Now, she was the heroine. He rode the military bus into Montgomery, called twice a day, sat in her parlor, and moved through her family's chaos, once watching as Judge Sayre chased Zelda around the dinner table with a carving knife. Scott said nothing. He never forgot it. She saw in him not rescue, but escape. Scott wasn't her only suitor. One officer performed drills on her lawn. Another crashed a plane. A mustached aviator proposed. "I'd never kissed a man with a mustache before," Zelda said. Scott didn't leap or beg. He waited. He made her laugh. He made her imagine. They carved their names into the country club doorframe, drank gin, kissed in theater balconies, read Keats on porch swings. She showed him her diary. He read it like scripture, later lifting her lines into this side of paradise. He told her she was the kind of girl he ought to marry. She teased him, mocked him. He sulked. She ignored him. He begged. She withheld. Then the war ended. No orders came. Confetti fell from the sky. The future reopened. He returned, stayed a while, and persuaded her to accept a loose proposal. He'd go to New York, make his name, and come back for her. She pretended to believe him. Zelda remained Zelda. She danced with other men. Let Scott feel her absence, not to wound, but to keep herself. They wrote, endlessly. Spring 1919 unfolded in paper and ink. "There's nothing on earth I want like you," she wrote. "Don't you think I was made for you?" But New York bruised Scott. Rejections piled up. He sold slogans, collected heartbreak. Zelda, still incandescent in Montgomery, didn't wait. She still had admirers. One sent a telegram. Another escorted her to Auburn. Scott burned. At 18, she understood what most women never dared to name. She didn't want to be simply a chapter in someone's story. "All the material things are nothing," she said. "I just hate to live a sordid, colorless existence because you'd soon love me less." Scott sent his mother's ring. "I love you so much, much, much. It just hurts every minute I'm without you." Zelda wore it to the country club. The Sayres were wary. Fitzgerald was charming, yes, but Irish Catholic, penniless, and prone to drink. Even Minnie, fond of him, left cautionary stories on Zelda's pillow about starving writers and stormy nights. By April, her letters flickered, velvet one day, fire the next. She wrote about a joyride to Auburn, a movie outing dressed as a man. That spring at the Folly Ball, she danced barefoot through black and gold tulle. Zelda played Folly herself. The cameras caught her sharp-eyed, luminous, laughing. Back in New York, he unraveled. Threatened to jump from a window. Friends told him to go ahead. Embarrassed, he climbed down. The smart set bought Babes in the Woods, $30. He bought white flannel trousers and sent Zelda a pink sweater. "Perfectly delicious," she wrote. "I'm going to save it till you come in June." Still, she danced, swam, smashed Victrola records in a fraternity house. And when she returned from Atlanta, she wore another man's fraternity pin. She sent it back with a sentimental note and accidentally mailed it to Scott. He was livid. Told her never to write again. Then wired, "I'm coming on the next train." They met in the Sayre parlor, the room where they once whispered poems. Now it echoed with pleading. He tried to kiss her into submission. She broke their engagement. He told her he couldn't succeed without her. But Zelda understood what that meant. If she married him and he failed, it would be her fault forever. He left with the ring still in his pocket. "The girl really worth having," he wrote. "Won't wait for anybody." Summer came. Montgomery melted. One afternoon, behind the chemical plant, she climbed the fire pool ladder. Her swimsuit caught, so she stepped out of it. Naked and sunlit, she rose to her toes and dove. In New York, Scott drank what was left of his money and returned to St. Paul on July 4th, broke, defeated, carrying a folder under his arm. The romantic egotist became this side of paradise. He wrote furiously, his ace in the hole, he called it. By September, the manuscript was at Scribner's. 2 weeks later, it was accepted. Zelda knew nothing. He hadn't written since June. He folded her letters into the novel. His heroine, Rosalind, danced like Zelda, spoke like Zelda, vanished like Zelda, whole lines lifted from her diary. If he couldn't have the girl, he'd make her fiction. In October, he wrote again. Zelda replied, "I'm mighty glad you're coming. I'm just recovering from a wholesome amour with Auburn's quarterback, so my disposition is excellent." This time, their meeting was quieter. For the first time, she saw something real. Confidence. Direction. A man not just dreaming glory, but building it. And this time, she believed him. When Scott left Montgomery that November, he handed her a copy of the novel. She read it, and something shifted. "Why can't I write?" she asked. "I'd like to tell you how fine I think the book is, and how miserably and completely I am yours." She softened. She admitted she hadn't believed in him at first, but now she saw the promise behind the performance. Maybe, she said, she could help. She offered notes, shaped scenes, sharpened characters. In time, those girls, flippant, modern, impossible, would become America's flappers. And Zelda, without always being named, would be there, on the page, in the mirror, in the margins. Meanwhile, New York was waking up. The Saturday Evening Post bought Scott's short stories. Scott wired telegrams, jubilant, breathless. Zelda pasted each one into her scrapbook. Then she started writing too. Her characters were vivid but aimless. Her mother suggested O. Henry. Zelda scoffed. She didn't want cleverness. She wanted life. She didn't crave fame, just freedom. A life of her own, the right to waste it beautifully. In January, Scott visited twice. After one trip, he sent her a platinum and diamond wristwatch. Zelda turned it over and over, enchanted. She told her mother they were marrying. Surprisingly, Mrs. Sayre approved, even suggested a Catholic ceremony. "I'm not a bit scared or shaky," Zelda wrote. "We're both unfinished pictures, but I know our colors will blend." When the first copy of the book arrived, pale green and real, Scott held it like a prize. "She's still on the fence," he told friends. "I may have to go to Montgomery to get her, but I believe this will do the trick." It already had. The Sayres announced the engagement on March 20th. She would come north to marry him. Zelda stayed up the night before the train, laughing with friends, planning to slide down hotel banisters and turn cartwheels in lobbies. Even as she packed her trousseau, she teased, "It might be Scott. It might be Babe Ruth." On April 3rd, 1920, the day before Easter, Zelda Sayre married F. Scott Fitzgerald in the rectory of St. Patrick's Cathedral. She wore midnight blue. Her bouquet was orchids and white flowers. It was a brilliantly sunny day. No parents, no parade, just Zelda, radiant, irreverent, unfinished, stepping into the city, into her own name, into a future she'd half-written herself. And beside her stood Scott, the young consort to a myth already in motion. They moved into a suite at the Biltmore Hotel. This side of paradise was a bestseller. Zelda called Scott her King of the Roses. They called themselves the Goofos. They ordered spinach and champagne at midnight, spun in the revolving doors of the Commodore. Scott undressed on stage at the Scandals. Zelda, perfectly sober, dove into the Union Square fountain. Dorothy Parker saw them atop a cab. They looked as though they had just stepped out of the sun. Everyone wanted to meet them. The novel wasn't just popular. It was a moment. Scott became, as he said, not only the spokesman of the time, but its product. Zelda was part of the package, dazzling, defiant, southern, new. But fame, like love, distorts the mirror. "We scarcely knew who we were," Scott said, "and we hadn't a notion what we were." They moved to Westport, A quiet summer by the Sound, swimming, writing. Scott's new novel, The Flight of the Rocket, would become The Beautiful and Damned. By July, the beautiful had begun to fray. George Nathan began visiting. He flirted with Zelda, left her notes, discovered her diary, and asked to publish it. Scott refused. He'd already used it in his stories. Zelda said nothing, but later she'd write half-mocking, "Plagiarism begins at home." They clashed. She flirted. He brooded. But something deeper endured. The nights. The conversations that circled and tangled and breathed. The intimacy that needed no words. By mid-July, Zelda was restless. The North felt distant. Montgomery called with its heat, its gossip, its comfort. Impulsively, Scott suggested they drive down. Their Marmon was falling apart. The trip, later immortalized in the cruise of the Rolling Junk, was axle trouble and blowouts. Zelda navigated by guesswork. Her knickerbocker suit scandalized Virginia. In Alabama, she added a skirt. They arrived exhausted, delighted, laughing. After 2 weeks, the laughter dimmed. Everything was the same. Zelda cried, not for what had changed, but for how little had. They sold the car and took the train back, this time with the judge and Mrs. Sayre. It was a disaster. In the Biltmore lobby, Scott turned to her mother. "You couldn't possibly know how beautiful she is. Watch the elevator. Every man here will watch her when she steps out." And they did. But the Sayres weren't enchanted. Zelda tried to host, to dazzle, but the distance only grew. After a drunken fall on a broken bottle, she needed stitches. "I can't sit on the 3 stitches," she wrote breezily. Her parents left early, and by August's end, even Scott's friends were strained. The drinking, the spectacle, the charm was wearing thin. After a vicious fight, Zelda walked out into the night. Not for drama, for distance. She wandered the railroad tracks. Scott followed, ticketless, breathless. He begged, she refused. Then, as she so often would, she came back. They were no longer the couple on the cab roof. They were 2 artists, tethered by obsession and ambition, and beginning to fray. Zelda's role had started to shift. She was still dazzling in public, the flapper wife, the scandalous southerner. But beneath the glitter, something quieter stirred. After another public fight, she sent Scott a letter, raw, confessional, aching. "Without you," she wrote, "I couldn't see or hear or feel or live." He folded her words into The Beautiful and Damned. But for Zelda, the fear wasn't abandonment, it was disappearance. She was afraid of vanishing into a life no longer her own. Scott's fame was rising fast. This side of paradise had made him the darling of a new generation. Their voice, their myth, their mirror. And Zelda, who had once choreographed their courtship like a Southern drama, now found herself orbiting a spotlight that no longer turned her way. She still loved the applause, still loved him, but something had shifted. She was no longer just loved, she was being written. The girl Scott married, bright, reckless, golden, had become a recurring character in his stories. And characters don't evolve, they perform. In 1921, Scott told a reporter, "Indeed, I married the heroine of my stories." He meant it as flattery. But Zelda, the real Zelda, was left wondering what happens when the fiction becomes more durable than the woman. When she said she was only good for useless, pleasure-giving pursuits, no one laughed. They joked about building a baby, a good one or a bad one, depending on whose traits it inherited. But the joke hid something real. They weren't planning a future. They were scripting caricatures. In his circle, Zelda flickered like a fable. Admired, envied, spoken of, but not truly heard. She became a symbol, not a speaker. And yet she was there, arguing, laughing, haunting his work. Her rhythm was in the ice palace. Her drawl in the jelly bean. She wasn't a muse, she was material. Scott said so himself. A friend once wrote, "She is without doubt the most brilliant and most beautiful young woman I've ever known." But brilliance burns, and Zelda was beginning to feel it. By Valentine's Day, everything changed. Zelda was pregnant. They planned one last escape before parenthood, Europe. But first, the Jungle Club. It came apart quickly. Scott was drunk, Zelda was furious. A bouncer blocked the door. She insisted Scott had deserted her. "No man," she snapped, "especially not a bouncer, keeps my husband from me." Scott tried to intervene. A shove, a punch. He crumpled. Zelda disappeared, then reappeared moments later on the sidewalk. Hatless, coatless, incandescent with rage. You're not going to let that so-and-so get away with that? She dragged him back inside. He was beaten again. It wasn't recklessness. It was theater. Zelda had cast him in a role, and he hadn't learned the lines. She expected valor. She got collapse. Zelda, nearly fearless, couldn't reconcile cowardice with love. Scott wrote it into the novel. Her bewilderment, her longing, the impossible expectations, his aching desire to meet them. They sailed for Europe on May 3rd. In London, they dined with Galsworthy and Lady Randolph Churchill. Zelda dazzled Winston with her wildness, her unstudied wit. Paris felt clipped, Venice overheated, Rome too gray, too formal. God damn the continent of Europe, Scott wrote. It wasn't their story. Not yet. They chose Montgomery for the birth. Zelda wanted quiet, familiarity. Instead, she found heat, scrutiny, recoil. 6 months pregnant, she swam in the public pool in a tank suit. No woman had dared before. She was asked to leave. By August, they fled to St. Paul. Zelda bloated in the heat, wearing red jersey dresses and a blank expression. Scott, watching her swell, wrote in his ledger, "No work, slow deteriorating repression, outbreak around the corner." He was right. On October 26, 1921, Zelda went into labor. It was long, brutal. Morphine smoothed the edges, but not the fear. When she came to, she whispered, "Oh God, Gufo, I'm drunk. Mark Twain, isn't she smart? She has the hiccups. I hope it's beautiful and a beautiful little fool." Scott wrote it down. Years later, he would give it to Daisy Buchanan in The Great Gatsby.
"I'm glad it's a girl, and I hope she'll be a little fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world. A beautiful little fool."
But the line had been Zelda's, spoken between pain and delirium, between exhaustion and love, and taken before she had the chance to remember it. They named the baby Patricia, then changed it to Frances. Zelda still called her Pat. To everyone else, she was Scotty. "She's awfully cute," Zelda wrote. "I'm very devoted to her, but quite disappointed over the sex." The joke landed, but the tone had shifted. A new life had begun. And another, Zelda's, had tilted off center. Zelda sank into a haze of postpartum depression. She loathed her body, the weight, the swelling, the unfamiliar reflection in the mirror. When the local paper published a photo of mother and daughter, she clipped it for her scrapbook, then shaded over her own face. Chin, cheeks, nose, willing her image to disappear. They left the hotel for a rented house, modest, creaking, forgettable. But they dressed for tragedy. At the bad luck ball, they arrived draped in black crepe, cloaked in their own performance. The joke was morbid, the laughter too loud. Zelda grinned through it. Together, they co-wrote a spoof paper, which they sold for the price of a kiss. Scott rented an office downtown to revise The Beautiful and Damned. When the novel was published, they fled to New York. 2 weeks lost to liquor, to laughter, to long nights that ended in arguments. When they returned home, Zelda was pregnant again, and this time they would not keep the child. Scott did not accompany her to the abortion. He merely scribbled about it in his notebook, clinical, distant, as though pain could be captured without ever being shared. The moment, like so many others, flickered into fiction. In The Beautiful and Damned, Gloria suspects she's pregnant. Anthony, bored and brittle, tells her to fix it. Later drafts softened the cruelty, removed the line, blurred the consequence, but the echo remained. And so did the distance between them. Scott, frustrated and flailing, began to blame Zelda for his failures, for his creative drought, for everything that would not resolve itself into prose. To a friend, he confessed, "The most enormous influence on me has been Zelda, her full-hearted selfishness and chill-mindedness." And yet he needed her, not just her presence, but her persona. When asked to review his novel, she agreed. The result was wicked and witty, a masterpiece of mockery. She told readers to buy the book so she could finally afford a platinum ring. She called the heroine Gloria a warning and a mirror. "It seems to me I recognized a portion of an old diary of mine," she wrote. "Mr. Fitzgerald, I believe that's how he spells his name, seems to believe that plagiarism begins at home." Whether she liked it or not, Zelda had become the face of the flapper, an emblem etched in jazz and gin, a woman whose reality and fiction blurred beyond recognition. The real girl and the fictional heroine were no longer separate. To the public, they were one. That summer, she penned Eulogy on the Flapper and tried to reclaim the role that had once been truly hers. She refused to be bored, Zelda wrote, chiefly because she wasn't boring. She was not a fool. She was free. She had the right to experiment, because she might be dead tomorrow. To her, the flapper was more than a fashion plate. She was rebellion. She was resistance. She was the refusal to disappear. Increasingly, it was Scott's stories and the culture they shaped that defined the flapper's form. And he needed Zelda to perform the part, not as herself, but as the character he had conjured. By fall, St. Paul had lost its luster. They moved to a house in Great Neck, a landscape of new money and mimicry, where the lights burned long past midnight and the neighbors watched with envy. "We are the very couple at whom all articles about the newly rich are aimed," Scott observed, but the sparkle masked the strain. In his ledger, he wrote, "Comfortable but dangerous and deteriorating, no ground under our feet." Their parties became legend. They began late and burned through the night. Scott performed card tricks, charming the bored and the brilliant. Zelda glittered like a jewel held over flame, bright, flickering, and impossible to touch. They drank until the night blurred. He would end the evening with a mournful ballad, eyes glassy, voice gone hollow. One editor, supine and drunk on the floor, looked up and thought he saw angels. Scott and Zelda, glowing like gods. That was how they appeared. But behind the shimmer, the spell was fraying. Debt had piled high. Scott drank too much. He blacked out, cursed friends, forgot hours. After one of those nights, Zelda sat beside her sister in the car, silent for a long moment. Then, barely above a whisper, "I never did want to marry Scott." Between 1922 and 1923, Zelda sold 2 stories, a review, and 2 essays. Our Own Movie Queen was mostly hers, though it was published under Scott's name. Her influence shaped his work. She urged him to drop the happy ending from The Beautiful and Damned, lobbied for Tales of the Jazz Age, and suggested the final name for The Great Gatsby. But the price of the performance grew steeper. The parties never ended, and the pressure to preserve the illusion, financially, emotionally, artistically, mounted with every invitation. That year, they earned $36,000 and were $5,000 in debt. In his ledger, he recorded it plainly. "The most miserable year since I was 19, full of failures and acute miseries." Zelda, meanwhile, began to write her own version. In her unpublished novel Caesar's Things, she described their life on Long Island as a whirl of lobbies and station platforms, events stacking like unpaid bills. They were tired of friends, of the noise, of themselves. And yet, as always, they believed in escape. In April 1924, they fled to France. It was cheaper, it was quieter, and it was far, far away. Paris shimmered, and they were swept into the orbit of Gerald and Sarah Murphy, American exiles living by a single creed: living well is the best revenge. The Murphys introduced them to Riviera dreams and Parisian artists, to Stravinsky, to Picasso, to pleasure arranged like a still life. Sarah and Zelda became fast friends. "We couldn't have taken Scott alone," Gerald would later say. "Zelda had style, not fashion, style." In June, they took the train south. Zelda would remember it in language only she could write: pink carnival skies, lemon groves, clouds of moths. They landed in St. Raphael, a red-tiled town scented with burning eucalyptus, and took up residence at the Villa Marie, an exotic white and blue house carved into the cliffs above the sea. Zelda adored it. For the first time in years, there were no parties to perform at, no strangers to charm. She swam every day, lean and muscled from hours in the sea, browning beneath the sun. She wore cotton swimsuits from the sailors' quarter and played elaborate crusader games with Scotty in the garden. Moats, castles, lead soldiers. For a while, it almost felt like beginning again, but it couldn't last. After all, Gerald said, Scott had his writing, Zelda had Scott, and she didn't have very much of him. She began spending afternoons with Edouard Jozan, a young French aviator stationed nearby. Tall, handsome, sun-burnished. They lay on canvas mats, inventing new cocktails, drifting through the heat and the hours. He offered companionship without performance, a mirror of the boys she had once loved in Montgomery, dashing, unbothered, soft-eyed. Somewhere, someone saw her not as a heroine or an adjective, just Zelda. Josen flew over the villa to make her smile. At first, Scott was relieved. She had someone to pass the time. But the Murphys noticed. Zelda and Josen, always laughing, dancing close at the casino. Everyone knew about it, but Scott, Sarah would later say. Then suddenly, Josen was gone. One night, around 3 a.m., Scott appeared at the Murphys' door. He was white-faced, a candle trembling in his hand. Zelda had swallowed a bottle of sleeping pills. Sarah Murphy walked her for hours, forcing her to stay awake, pouring olive oil down her throat. Zelda survived, but something inside her cracked. In public, they smiled, played, pretended the summer had simply exhausted them. In his ledger, Scott wrote blandly, "Trouble clearing away." But everyone felt the current beneath. Later, he admitted Zelda had asked him for a divorce, that she said she loved Josen. Furious, he locked her in her room and demanded a duel. Josen must face him, man to man. The officer never came. He disappeared and never saw them again. In Save Me the Waltz, Zelda wrote, "Whatever it was that she wanted from Jack, Jack took it with him. You took what you wanted from life, if you could get it, and you did without the rest." Autumn arrived like punishment. The sea turned to pewter. The mistral screamed down from the Alps. The villa grew cold. The gardens died. Scott worked obsessively on the story that would become The Great Gatsby. Zelda drifted through the city in silence. In his notes, Scott wrote simply, "Ill feeling with Zelda." Still, she tried to help him. She sketched Gatsby when he couldn't picture his hero. She read aloud from cowboy novels to soothe his mind. She suggested the title and helped shape lines. By winter, the book was done. The marriage remained, at least in shape. But something irreversible had shifted. Love had become both weapon and wound. Two people writing their lives faster than they could live them. By the new year, Zelda was sick, racked with colitis that came and went like a curse. She barely ate, lay awake through nights of pain. Her body seemed to echo the illness blooming in her heart. On Capri, she began to paint, first small sketches, then landscapes in raw color. Scott drank. He bragged to friends they were still enormously in love. Zelda smiled for him, but was beginning to understand the weight of pretending. Back in Paris, spring had arrived, and with it 1,000 parties and not a single page of work. That was when they met Ernest Hemingway. Scott, dazzled, saw in Hemingway a younger version of himself, tall, tanned, certain of his genius. Zelda saw something else, swagger disguised as sincerity, another man certain of his importance, another mirror she refused to flatter. The men became inseparable. Scott introduced Hemingway to editors, sent his work to scribners, called him the real thing. Scott confessed to Hemingway about the affair with Josen. He told it like a story he'd written, polished, tragic, rehearsed. Later, he and Zelda would perform the tale at dinner parties, their voices overlapping, hers solemn, his wistful, ending with the invented death of her lover. It wasn't truth. It was theater. Hemingway saw through it. They were jealous in different directions, he later said. Zelda of Scott's writing, Scott of Zelda herself. When The Great Gatsby was published that April, Scott waited for fame to catch up to genius. Critics adored it. Readers didn't. He drank to steady the disappointment. Zelda noticed how Hemingway ruled his household. "I notice in the Hemingway family," she joked to his wife, "you do what Ernest wants." Hemingway didn't laugh. He called her crazy. She called him bogus. Scott tried to keep the peace, but the damage was done. She would not bow to another man's self-importance. In August 1925, at a mountaintop inn above Nice, they dined with the Murphys. Candles flickered. The valley fell away into velvet dark. At a nearby table sat Isadora Duncan, surrounded by admirers. Scott, half drunk, crossed the terrace. He knelt beside the aging dancer. She stroked his hair and called him her centurion. Zelda watched in silence. Then, without a word, she rose, stepped onto her chair, and leapt across the table into the black stairwell behind them. A scream, then silence. Moments later, she reappeared at the top of the steps, blood running down her knees, her face expressionless. Something had broken loose in Zelda that night. It wasn't jealousy. It was the shock of becoming a spectator in her own life. They moved again to a larger house, the Villa St. Louis, perched on the sea. Zelda retreated inward. In home movie footage from that summer, she sits beneath a striped parasol, wind in her dark hair, smiling nervously at the camera. She waves, then lowers her gaze to her hands, as if startled to find them trembling. The image lasts only a second, but it's long enough to feel what no one around her could name. Zelda Fitzgerald was beginning to disappear. By that summer, her mischief had changed its tone. One night at the casino, the terrace nearly empty, she rose from her chair, lifted her skirts, and began to dance. Scott sat still, glass in hand. The orchestra hesitated, then played for her. She was so self-possessed, Gerald Murphy recalled. She had this tremendous dignity. Somehow she was incapable of doing anything unladylike. Where Zelda was composed, Scott grew reckless. He would corner strangers, demand secrets, chase gossip until dawn. Friends began to dread Fitzgerald evenings. They weren't gatherings. They were tests, fevered acts of endurance. Two people daring life to keep up. That June, Zelda was hospitalized in Paris for appendicitis. The operation was minor, but months of colitis and ovarian pain had worn her thin. They had tried for another child, unsuccessfully. When Sarah Mayfield visited, Scott was out drinking. He praised Gatsby, argued about Hemingway, and ended the night unconscious. He never reached the hospital. When asked about Hemingway's new novel, Zelda answered coolly, "Bullfighting, bull-slinging, and bullshit." "Zelda," Scott snapped. "Why shouldn't I? He's phony as a rubber check and you know it." Hemingway called her destructive, a siren pulling Scott from greatness. Between them, Scott was torn. Gerald described her as vivid, intuitive, always speaking from a private, luminous world. Her mind made different connections, he said. Zelda might ask, sincerely, "Don't you think Al Jolson is just like Christ?" and let the question hang like perfume. When she and Scott fought, it was never in public, but the next morning, her trunk might be on the street. That was Zelda's signature. The trunk meant war. And yet, when someone insulted Scott, she defended him with perfect, devastating timing. One night, drunk and groping Sarah Murphy in a taxi, Scott embarrassed everyone. "You smell awful," Sarah snapped. Zelda, cool and calm, replied, "I think he smells wonderful." But sometimes her gaze would turn blank, like she was waiting to be seen in a way no one could manage. There were nights she would strip to her slip, climb the rocks above the sea, and dive without warning. 30 feet, no lights, no hesitation. Scott would follow, trembling, but always diving. But the performances were harder now. She still called herself a flapper, still gave interviews about raising her daughter to be brave, happy, and beautiful. "I don't want her to be a genius," Zelda said. "I want her to do as she pleases. A flapper gets more happiness than a woman with a career." Flappers are brave, but beneath it, something fragile pulsed. A woman who had lived in performance for too long, who had stopped believing a deeper life was possible. As the year ended, they packed to return to America, nearly broke. Scott had no new novel to show, but still, they told themselves there was more to be made. There was something left. They asked a lot of life, Zelda would write later, and gave freely of what they had. So they lived, cutting off the complicated, replacing it with the simple, until there was little left. Scott had been hired by United Artists to write a flapper picture, a studio commission meant to lift them from debt and failure and fling them back into orbit. It was supposed to be a golden moment, a resurrection. Zelda came along quietly, hoping a change of scene might resurrect them too. Los Angeles was a mirage. Zelda wrote to Scotty that the air shimmered like film stock, that the sidewalks gave slightly under her shoes, as if the whole city were rubberized. Beautiful, flexible, and hollow, they moved into a white bungalow off Sunset. Zelda dressed it like a fever dream, fabric lilies, dogs on velvet pillows, a crooked Japanese lantern hung from a hook in the ceiling. She wandered the house barefoot, visited film sets like a ghost, read scripts she did not believe in. Scott worked in spurts. Mostly, he drank. Surrounded by men who treated women like punchlines and actresses like carbon copies. Zelda drifted on the edges of their lives, her voice dimmed, her wit dismissed. "Everyone here can sing and dance," she wrote, and I feel very stupid. At Samuel Goldwyn's costume party, they arrived uninvited, barking like dogs at the front door, crawling on hands and knees. Zelda vanished into the bathroom, ran a hot bath, undressed, and lowered herself into the tub. When she emerged, she patted her hair dry, redressed, and descended to the party as though nothing had happened. The performance was unraveling. So was she. Then came Lois Moran. She was 17, wide-eyed, soft-voiced. Scott called her not like the others. He took her to dinners, brought her to parties, spoke of her with a reverence he once reserved for Zelda. Zelda said nothing, watched everything. He gave Lois a copy of Tender as the Night in progress, came home humming the way she laughed, and then he wrote her into a story. Jacob's Ladder, a tale of a girl too young to love and a man too old to resist. She wasn't a person. She was a symbol, a balm, a dream. Zelda recognized the trick, the same one he'd played before. Rewrite her until she vanished, until some other girl stood in her place. When she pushed back, Scott insisted Lois had talent, and at least she did something with her life. Zelda said nothing. She gathered every dress she had ever sewn, the gowns of her flapper days, the fabrics of a girlhood spent shining, and burned them in the bathtub, watched them blacken and curl and vanish. She wrote to a friend, "He fell in love with a girl who isn't me," and I began to disappear. They left California with soot in their mouths. On the train east, after another fight, Zelda opened the window and threw out her wristwatch. Platinum, diamond-studded, the one Scott had given her when the world was still unfolding like a storybook. Time meant nothing now. They settled next at Ellerslie, a rented house on the Delaware River. A new start, a familiar lie. Zelda called it her fairyland. She told friends she heard ghost footsteps on the stairs, that the wallpaper curled like old parchment. She filled the house with soft things, rose-colored cushions, ashtrays shaped like birds, satin slippers shaped like foxes. She painted the breakfast room mint green, planted roses in the yard, created beauty not to impress but to survive. Scott turned his study into a war bunker, wrote in angry bursts, piled pages on the floor. At night, they threw parties, brilliant, brittle affairs. Editors, actors, debutantes drifting through rooms like smoke. Zelda drifted too. She wore gold lame and paper crowns, told ghost stories in the dark, vanished mid-sentence, locked herself in the attic for hours until Scott played her favorite jazz record from the hall below. Once, she flirted with a Princeton man just long enough for Scott to notice. Then she curled on the stairs and cried. She began to write again, 3 essays. Each one sharp, strange, and glimmering. The first was about the lost beauty of Park Avenue, children carrying Pomeranians, apples purchased with the gravity of diplomacy. The second looked back at her post-war generation, disillusioned, drifting, brilliant, and broken. They were hers, every word. And yet when the magazine published them, they insisted she add Scott's name. When an editor offered Zelda to publish her story, Scott refused. He said it was too close to something he was working on, that she should wait. But she saw what he was doing. Once again, he was writing her voice, her life, her ache, and when she tried to claim it, he silenced her. He told a friend, "I'm writing a story about a woman who wants to destroy a man because she loves him too much. She gets jealous. Then she unalives herself, not all at once. Step by step, twice that year, doctors were called to Ellerslie to sedate her. Morphine after nights of screaming, drinking, weeping on the floor. With nothing left, Zelda began to dance. At first, it was a joke. A mirror strung in fringe, a clearing in the drawing room. But soon the jokes faded, and the dancing stayed. She moved like someone haunted by rhythm, as if there were a language buried in her bones, and movement was the only way to speak it. She danced mornings, then afternoons, then nights, on sore calves, on blistered feet. She changed shoes 3 times a day. When Scott asked what she was doing, she said, "Trying to feel my shape again." She began dancing through dinner, turning slow circles across Persian rugs. Sarah Murphy wrote her a letter. "You don't seem like yourself," she said. Zelda replied, "I am like me, just the me I've been trying to reach." She was eating less, sleeping differently, speaking in riddles. Once she passed out while tying her slippers. Scott called it vanity. middle-aged nonsense. Zelda called it becoming. He mocked her hours, her training, her obsession. One night he came home drunk. They fought. In a fit of anger, he threw her ballet shoes into the fireplace. She said his father had been a drunk Irish policeman. He struck her across the face. Her nose bled. She locked herself in the bedroom. All night, Scott sat outside the door, slipping apology notes beneath the crack like offerings to a shrine he desecrated. At dawn, she opened it. Zelda danced harder. Her feet blistered, hardened. Her hair grew wild, tied back each morning in the same loose knot. At the Wilmington Ballet Studio, she outlasted girls half her age, stayed later, pushed farther. Scott came once. He made a joke about the room smelling like feet and desperation. She didn't flinch. Later, he called her obsession grotesque. One night, as she raised her arms in the mirror, he stood behind her. "You'll never be a real dancer," he said. "You're too old." "Then I'll be an imaginary one," she said. "That's where all the best are anyway." In the spring, they sailed to France, cool, polite, two people already departed. Zelda trained in Paris under Lyubov Egorova, a former star of the Imperial Ballet. She arrived early, stayed late, danced through lunch, through pain. Her limbs trembled on stairwells. Her hands shook in the mornings. She began fainting, first in the metro, then in rehearsal. The lights swam like fish. Sarah Murphy asked, "What happened to the old Zelda?" "She died," Zelda said. "She broke her spine trying to dance. One afternoon she collapsed in the tub. The water was cold. Her lips were blue. She had taken laudanum. Scott found her, soaked, shaking. She spent 3 days in bed, curtains drawn, feet wrapped in gauze. "I'm tired," she said. "You're broken," he told her. Back at Ellerslie, she drove to Philadelphia, brought a thermos of coffee and a stack of notebooks, walked the museum for hours. She sat in front of the Degas ballerinas, stared at their motion, their ache, the brushwork. She didn't cry, didn't move, just watched them breathe. When she came home, she stood in the vestibule for 10 minutes before turning the knob. For a time, she painted again, tried oils, landscapes with too much sky, rooms with no doors. In one painting, a girl floats above a house that looks like Ellerslie. Her face is blurred. When Scott asked if it was meant to be her, Zelda shrugged. "Could be anyone," she said. "Could be no one." That year, she wrote one last letter to a friend she hadn't seen in a decade. It ended. "I still believe in things. I just don't expect them anymore." That December, they packed again. Zelda looked once into her mirror, touched the edge with her fingertips, then walked out. The jazz age was ending. What waited ahead was quieter and far more dangerous. And Zelda, dancer, ghost, survivor, simply stepped into the next sentence. They traveled along the coast to Nice, the air glittering with the last mercy of summer, pausing only long enough to breathe in the shimmer of the Riviera before pressing on toward Paris. Zelda moved quickly, almost feverishly, as though the motion itself could keep her from coming apart. Egorova arranged her mornings and her afternoons, endless classes that consumed her until nightfall. She threw herself into the work with a kind of desperate devotion, vanishing into a world of ghosts and presentiments. "I worked constantly," she would say later, moody and superstitious. "I lived in a quiet, hypersensitized world of my own." Scott, meanwhile, drank. When she came home from the studio, he was often gone, or worse, present but unreachable, a stranger seated inside her silence. One evening, they invited Egorova to dinner. Scott flirted, the older woman humored him, and Zelda, watching them through the shimmer of her own wine glass, felt the first thin crack of humiliation. Later, he mocked her devotion to her teacher, calling Egorova a washed-up drunk. That spring, Hemingway was in Paris, distant now, finishing A Farewell to Arms. He allowed Scott to read the manuscript, and Scott, ashamed of his own paralysis, read passages aloud one night, asking if they weren't beautiful. "Pretty damned biblical," Zelda said, and the words fell between them like glass. At another dinner, she spoke of her writing, almost pleading, as though to prove she still existed. The table turned away. When the evening ended, she looked around with that restless, childlike light that always appeared before the storm. "What'll we do? Let's do something," she said, proposing they go roller skating. Scott's hand closed around her wrist. He led her to a taxi and told her it was time for bed. A friend remembered how quietly she obeyed, as if she were a little girl returning to the nurse. That winter, she began to write a series of sketches, portraits of young women whose elegance concealed a loneliness she could not name. She wrote in fierce bursts, still dancing every day, her life divided between the page and the studio. By June, the fourth story was finished. Although they were hers alone, some appeared under both their names, others under Scott's. "I had nothing to do with it," he later confessed, except suggesting a theme. The last three were never printed. They were strange, haunting, and entirely her own. Girls adrift through rose-gold rooms and pastel restraint, their ambitions burning without direction, their courage spoken of but never seen. They shimmered, then vanished, as if life itself had forgotten to claim them. To the world she still glowed. In truth, she was dimming. She said she wrote to pay for her lessons, that she would not use Scott's money. He watched her productivity with something close to envy, unable to write a line of his own. Conversation became effort. They seldom went out together, and when they did, Scott studied her with a lover's vigilance, searching for the first tremor of collapse. Zelda endured his drunken cruelties, his apologies, the carousel of contrition that turned endlessly beneath them. They avoided being alone, yet their loneliness was absolute. They had begun, without admitting it, a contest for survival, a slow drowning in the same water. As Scott would later write in Tender Is the Night, "I can't do anything for you anymore. I'm trying to save myself." Their nights blurred into delirium. "Nobody knew whose party it was," Zelda wrote later. "When you couldn't survive another night, you went home and slept, and when you came back, a new set of people had consecrated themselves to keeping it alive." Scott spoke endlessly of Hemingway, his work, his courage, the rawness of his prose. Zelda accused him of wanting more from the man than admiration. One night, Scott came home from drinking with the Hemingways, collapsed on the bed, and in his sleep murmured, "No more, baby." To Zelda, it was confession. She called him a homosexual. Others had begun to whisper about it as well. They fought until dawn, and the next day the gossip began. Scott's letters to editors and friends were frantic denials, the desperation of a man whose life was disintegrating by whispers. By July, they fled Paris for the Riviera, hoping the light might cauterize the wounds between them. They rented a small villa in Cannes. Zelda's face had lost its color, her laughter its human tone. Gerald Murphy said later that her laughter frightened him. It was beautiful but wrong, the sound of delight slipping its moorings. One evening, they went to a cinema near Antibes. On the screen, an octopus drifted across a field of swaying reeds, slow and dreamlike. Zelda shrieked and flung herself across Murphy's lap, crying, "What is it? What is it?" The others stared, confused. It was only an octopus, but to Zelda it was something else, a shape rising from the dark. Still she danced, still she wrote, as though creation itself could keep her from disintegrating. Scott confessed to Hemingway that he collapsed most nights about 11. "Tears or gin," he wrote, telling whoever's near that I haven't a friend in the world, generally including Zelda. They returned to Paris in October, hollow-eyed. On a road skirting the cliffs, Zelda seized the steering wheel, convinced the car was steering itself into oblivion, and turned the car towards the cliff. "It seemed to me it was going into the beyond," she said later. By then, she no longer cared about appearances. "We went to sophisticated places with charming people," she wrote, "but I was grubby and didn't care." Her hands trembled even at rest. She had lost 15 pounds in all sense of proportion. Then at last came a letter from Naples, the San Carlo Opera Ballet. They had seen her, invited her, offered a solo in Aida. A contract, a season, a company, a future. It was not fantasy, but fact. She did not go. No one knows why, perhaps not even Zelda. Scott never spoke of it. Years later, he told people she had been mistaken for a shimmy dancer from the Folies Bergère. But the letter was real, and so was the chance. Zelda, who had destroyed her body for the dream, who had built her world around the bar, the mirror, and the ache, simply let it go. The dream she had bled for dissolved without a curtain call, without applause, without goodbye. By February 1930, escape had become their instinct. They went to Algiers to forget. "It was a trying winter," Zelda wrote. "We went to forget bad times. The photographs tell what words conceal. Scott, sunburned and smiling faintly. Zelda, hunched and hollow, her eyes darkened as if light itself had turned against her. When they returned to Paris, even her closest friends could no longer reach her. At an art exhibit, she turned suddenly and asked, "Were you talking about me?" They hadn't been, but she could no longer tell. She began to distrust everyone. The Murphys, her old friends, even Egorova. At a luncheon, she became frantic about missing her lesson, fled the table, and ran into the street. A friend followed and found her in a taxi, half changed for class, murmuring words that dissolved before they reached her lips. Egorova saw the same unraveling, the strange gestures, the trembling mouth. During tea one afternoon, Zelda fell to her knees before her teacher and wept. Egorova rose quietly, left the room, and never returned. After another quarrel and another unaliving attempt, everything gave way. She was admitted to Malmaison Hospital outside Paris. Restless, pacing, she whispered to the air, "It's dreadful. What's to become of me? I must work. I must work or die. I must see Madame Egorova. She is the sun on crystal, the symphony of all that's perfect." They said she was only exhausted. They let her go after 2 weeks. Scott drifted through bachelor dinners and wedding parties, laughing too loudly, writing to Perkins that Zelda got a sort of nervous breakdown from overwork. He called it a spell of nerves. It was not. Back in their apartment, Zelda returned to her lessons with manic devotion. Within days, she began to tremble. She fainted, woke, fainted again. Her dreams crawled into daylight, voices whispering, shadows speaking back. She talked to no one and to people who weren't there. She wept in the corners of rooms, begged unseen hands to leave her be. And one night, in the depths of that fever, she tried to end it, not from drama, but from despair. Morphine calmed her shaking, but only for a time. The phantoms came again, more vivid than faces, more real than the world around her. Scott, terrified now, refused to let her out of his sight. He demanded she go to Switzerland. She refused. He demanded again. At Valmont, a clinic meant for the body, the doctors found nothing wrong with hers. They called in Dr. Oscar Forel, a quiet man whose calm made everything worse. Zelda denied she was ill. She said she'd been brought there by force. She begged to return to Paris, to her ballet, to the only thing that still made sense. Her husband's visits unstrung her. Each time he tried to reason with her, she accused him again of betrayal, of being a homosexual. Then she wept. Then she begged. Then she cursed. There was nothing wrong with her body, Forel said, but the mind was breaking. A rest cure would do nothing. She needed real treatment, and she needed to be away from him. Forel offered her a place in his clinic at Prangin's, but only if she came willingly. For one night she agreed. By morning, she changed her mind and left with Scott. Rosalind's husband, Newman Smith, gentle, patient, steady, came from Brussels. Somehow he persuaded her to go, and so they drove north through the mountains toward the white walls waiting above Lake Geneva. Zelda sat silent in the back seat, staring at the blur of trees and light. Behind her lay the life she had built from discipline and defiance. The mirrors, the music, the bar, the dream. She had given it everything, and it had given her nothing. By the time they reached Switzerland, she had made her decision. She would destroy what remained of that other life. The tutus, the shoes, the portrait of Egorova. She would abandon the woman she had tried to become, the dancer who believed pain could be transcended. The car wound along the lake, the air bright and merciless. Zelda pressed her forehead to the window. If I couldn't be great, she thought, it wasn't worth going on. In the back seat, the suitcase shifted with each curve. Soft thuds, like the echo of applause in an empty theater. And somewhere ahead, beyond the still water and the white walls of Prangin's, the world was waiting to forget her. Join us next Saturday for the final chapter of Zelda's story. The years that tested both her sanity and her marriage, from the wards of Swiss asylums to the ruins of their love, from the paintings she created to the book she was never allowed to write, and the one she was. Through letters penned in confinement and a desperate fight to create again, this is the story of how Zelda Fitzgerald tried to reclaim herself, and how, Even in the world's forgetting, her flame refused to die. And in the shadows of those white hospital walls, Zelda would begin the greatest battle of her life to prove that her story wasn't over. But what she would write inside those walls and what she would become, no one could have foreseen. Thank you for watching this week's film on Zelda Fitzgerald. Let me know what you think about her story so far and if you enjoy these two-part films. In our effort to tell each story in full and still post every Saturday, we sometimes divide them into two halves, so every chapter can breathe. Here at Mythic Women, we go beyond the scandal to tell the whole story, of the forgotten, the miswritten, the misunderstood. We bring you the glory and the fall, the broken and the unbreakable, the women who shattered expectations, the world around them, and sometimes themselves. Thank you for being part of this journey, for helping us keep these stories alive. Every view, every like, every share is an act of remembrance, a small rebellion against erasure. We also have a new feature here at Mythic Women. Coming up on Wednesdays, we are going to start posting shorter stories on remarkable women throughout history. All will still be written by me, but in order to keep them fresh, I have brought on a new narrator for those videos. Please welcome her warmly.
Hi, I'm Kate, and I'm honored to join Mythic Women. Together, we'll explore the lives of extraordinary women whose names the world forgot, but whose courage still echoes. We'll meet Ida B. Wells, who defied silence with her pen, Qing Shi, the pirate queen who ruled the South China Sea, Noor Inayat Khan, the musician turned secret agent who fought the Nazis, Artemisia Gentileschi, who painted her own justice onto canvas, and Anna Coleman Ladd, the sculptor who gave faces back to soldiers scarred by war. These are the women who changed the world, quietly, defiantly, and forever. I look forward to bringing these stories to you. Now, back to Elizabeth, so she can thank the wonderful patrons of the channel.
Thank you, and thank you as well to our channel members and patrons, the real mythic men and women who help keep us alive. Velocity Girl, Zen Life 68, Philip Gallegos, Kingsley Clark, Kafam Chung, Deborah Himes, Bavia Andrea, Tracy Walsh, Joy McGuire, Amanda Lynn, Deborah Shepard, Jules Mack, Kimberly Ray, Monica, Krista Schaefer-Hazlett, Deborah Chmielewski, Anna Livy, Kathleen Martin, Kelly Bowen, Melissa Gilmore, Marcia Corbin, Randy Fox, Deb Fisher, Indira Becha, Nikayla Rihanna, Sarah Bleiberg-Stanton, Snowball. Additional thanks to Joanne Thomas Yakato, Janet Phelps, Black Cat Tarot, Chrissy Bethune, Karen Craig, Murphy's Bed, Lynn Sharp, M. King, Virgie R. Nelson, Michelle Inman, Mikkel Dean Augustine, Wendy Fairfull, Trudy DeSwart, Susie Work, Ram, Fiona McDougall, Julianne Scovern, Sashi, Amy Johnson, Patricia Ahmad, Kathy Harris, Elizabeth, Morgan Rose, Moore Ross, Mary Margaret Cronin, The Moon is Blue Tonight, Julia Sierra Sanchez, MPB Angola, Deborah Eaton Kent, Rebecca Christians, Melu Marsa, Catherine Wolfe, Virginia Fraser, Cindy Morton, Elle Stadler, Libby Armstrong, Albert Norman LeBeuf, Julie Woith, Abby Henriksen, Susan Gillen, Hello Kitty, J.K., Charles Rosenbaum, Joanne Coleman, Maria Swisher, Michelle Gross, Trisha Commons, Lori Weckbaugh, Miriam Danielle, Sally, Tillery Sims, Cynthia Nagley, Judy Triplett, Shauna Nelson, Jody Bertolucci, Devin Hughes, Tiffany Bristow, Caribbean, Julianne D. Leanne, Jody Mamenga, Tracy Wilson, Ashley Kane, Sarah Herbert, Donay Crossley, Nature Grell, Colleen Fay, Ann Casillas, Cynthia Mace, Mina, Nika Loving Foster, Claire Zimmerman, Gianna Bloomer, Nicole Ramsey, Jennifer Phillips, Julianne D., Peter Kaukonen, Jacqueline Spalding, Crystal Wilhite, Virginia Martinez, TJ Sia Zigzag, Michelle Cohen, MM, Marcelina Martin, Beth Dawson, Amber Perry, Shanna Supreme, David Deborah Brittany Walker, Catherine Latinsky Harrison, Rodney Russell, Corley Vance, Lindsay Zeller, H.R. Hart, Tanya Maza, Anne-Marie Walker, Generic 99, Nida S., Judith Barnett, Andrea Blackburn, Cheryl Kincaid, Laura Frankstone, Rebecca Salmon, Kathleen Veronese, Black Knight 5897, Mary Jane Moore, Three French Hens, Paula Coons, and Susan Sinead. If I missed your name, please give me a shout out in the comments, as sometimes I make mistakes in the list. Thank you. Your support is everything. And thank you to everyone who supports with comments and views and understands when the videos are pulled and that in this project, we are all together. Lastly, to the silent men and women out there watching till the last note plays, thank you too. Until next week, Stay curious, stay strong, keep exploring history. And as always, thanks for watching Mythic Women.